Hey guys, Corey, Faymus Media. Question, what would you get if you mixed the A7S's low-light abilities with the new internal 4K and new body design of the A7R Mark II? Well, that's simple. You'd get the A7S Mark II. So here we are reviewing the Sony A7S Mark II. It's taken me some time to get a hold of it, but I finally have it. And we're here in Sinatra Park in Hoboken. I figured I would change up the scenery, so now you can see Manhattan, the lower west side, as seen from New Jersey. So we're going to be reviewing the A7S Mark II, and I want to touch base on a few things. It's got the same monitor and the same body as the A7R Mark II. Some things have changed over the A7S, and those things besides the back screen and the body is 5-axis stabilization, the 1.2 million dot LCD screen over the 921,000 dot screen of the A7S. It also has a lot more focusing points, 169 phase detection points versus the A7S at 25. So this is overall a much better camera. It does focus a lot better than the A7S, which a lot of people said they were concerned why I said it wasn't good for photography. Now the A7S is good for photography because the images that it produces are very vivid, great dynamic range, but they're low megapixel count. If you don't need high megapixel, it's a good camera, but the autofocusing capabilities of the A7S weren't that great. I not only used it with Canon lenses, but I've also used it with lenses made by Sony and Zeiss that were native mounts for the camera, and it just didn't focus that quickly. The A7R Mark II is a killer camera and is the fastest of all of them, and it's still faster than the A7S Mark II as well. But this is a great camera. It's got the low light capabilities of the A7S, and it's got internal 4K. Is the overheating issue resolved with the A7S Mark II? I don't know, because I never had overheating issues with the A7R Mark II, but I haven't really heard any complaints about this camera, so it's hopeful that there'll be none for anybody, and that's just what we can hope for right now, but I have not seen any complaints on it. It's got the T* coated electronic viewfinder, which is amazing. Same as the A7R Mark II, locking dial, everything on here is identical to the A7R Mark II. They're finally all the same across the board instead of the old A7, A7S, and A7R, which all had different bodies, and they're all different in their own way. It looks like they're leveling the playing field with all these great cameras. So, let's get to shooting. We're going to do some video and photos with this amazing camera. Let's see what it does. It's starting to sunset here. We're going to be shooting up and down the strip. We're just going to keep shooting with the Sony A7S Mark II because I'm sure I can shoot in a black hole, and we're still going to get great images, which is the reason why I chose to do this review here in the dark. So, if you look back at all my other videos, the A7S and the A7R Mark II, we always do them in the dark. Don't worry, I am not a night hawk per se. It's just that this camera's so good in the dark, I really want to test its ability. So let's get shooting. Enough of my jibber jabber. We're gonna get this locked on and do some nice steady video of the water and change up the scenery just a little bit. So they've added S-Log3 to this camera, and S-Log3 is going to give you more dynamic range. It just simply is going to give you a flatter image here. They got S-Gamut 3, Cine, and regular S-Gamut, so we're going to be shooting in the S-Gamut 3 Cine, which is going to give us the overall best color depth that we can achieve while shooting here today. It's also got amazing zebras. Now, I can say that the zebras on the A7S Mark II are by far the best. There's also a couple other things that you're going to be wanting to think about before you decipher what it is that you need. And the A7R Mark II is better in Super 35, whereas the A7S Mark II is better in full frame. The reason is you're getting full pixel readout because 4K video is right around 8 to 10 megapixels. So you're getting the full readout of the sensor, and with the Super 35 crop on the A7R Mark II, you're getting, that section of the sensor for 4K, because if you were to shoot 4K video on the A7R Mark II, like I said in that video, you're gonna have pixel binning and all kinds of craziness. So Sony had to give you Super 35 in order to resolve any issues that may have occurred while shooting video. With the A7S Mark II, you're getting full frame video, so that's gonna give you much wider shots, and you're gonna get all the low light performance. So if you don't need the megapixels for photo, the A7S Mark II is the better camera. If you need the megapixels and the video, the A7R Mark II is the better camera. So here we go, shooting some video. The dynamic range is just stunning. Absolutely amazing, the dynamic range, especially the fact that I'm able to use S-Log3. Who'd ever thought we would get these kind of features in a camera less than $3,000? So this camera, for its price point and its size, is a better choice than the FS7 would be. Even though the FS7 is a great camera, this is smaller and more compact. It has the S-Log2 and 3, and it's much, much better in low light. And although the FS7 is a great camera, there's no such thing as one size fits all per se. The A7S Mark II at this price point is an absolute bargain, to say the least. Closer shot, the lower west side here in 4K. And we're here at about 4:30 at night. The sun's setting in about 30 minutes. And it's not that dark out right now. It's pretty nice, but for a camera, it might be a little bit of a struggle, depending on what camera you're shooting on. I'm shooting at f/14. 20 minutes from sunset, I'm shooting at f/14. And the sun is not clearly visible from where I'm standing at all. And it's, like I said, somewhat dark. So this shows you how good this camera performs in low light, that at 3200 ISO, I gotta go to f/14 due to the sensitivity of the camera. The A7S Mark II is also gonna give you 120 frames in 1080p, which is insane. 120 frames per second in 1080p. Crazy. I really love the fact that I don't have to carry the Adorama Shogun recorder with me, and I can do internal 4K. Although the Adorama Shogun recorder is great, you can get a much more accurate focus, as it's got focus peaking that is unparalleled. The focus peaking on that monitor is amazing. Also, with the Adorama Shogun recorder, it's a bigger monitor, so you can see more of the details of what you're shooting. So it's not a bad thing to have that. And even with the A7S Mark II, at some point I would probably use the Shogun recorder. But the fact that you can do internal 4K when you want to, when you're trying to be discreet or you don't want to carry around all the extra gear, that ability is something great. We're going to be testing out the internal 120 frames a second in 1080, which I'm going to do right about now. Also, the A7S Mark II has Uncompressed Raw, so you can shoot your photos uncompressed RAW. Finally, Sony gives us Uncompressed Raw. Thank you, Sony. Thank you so much. That's been needed forever, and they're finally listening. They're really starting to listen to the things that we want and need. Now we're in the XAVCS HD at 120 frames a second at 100 megabit. It does crop in a little bit on the sensor while doing that, but you're getting 120 frames a second in 1080, which is really, really good. That's about what the Red Scarlet shoots in 1080. It actually shoots about 151, but you're getting 120 in a $3,000 camera, so that's pretty impressive to say the least. 120 frames a second in camera. Sony's really stepping up their game. It's really a pleasure to shoot on these cameras. I was shooting with the A7S and the A7R Mark II and the A7S Mark II all week, and running a 3-camera setup with all Sonys, and just the fact that they all color grade match perfectly together is a dream. Like, they are so awesome, especially when you're shooting a wedding or something in low light and you're running a couple of these, maybe even a few of them, maybe 4 or 5 of them, 6 of them maybe, as many as you really want. I mean, the low light capabilities, I mean, my videographer can't believe how we can be in the pitch black shooting at 100,000 ISO and it makes it look like daytime and it's the middle of the night. The camera's just phenomenal. Like, I never thought that day would come. But Sony has, like, invented low light capabilities. Let's get a nice shot of the west side of Manhattan. If you see, there's the Empire State Building. That's relatively close to where we shoot, but when we do most of my videos, we're usually in Midtown by B&H or somewhere close to that. So we would be just north of that, you know, a couple of blocks. Somewhere in where you see the Empire State Building and the MetLife Building, we're usually right around that area. It's hard to really point it out because we're, you know, about a mile from where we normally shoot. Draw a straight line. Unfortunately, to get there from here would take like an hour, even though it's really only 1 mile away, which is crazy. Let's go back to 4K, 24 at 100 megabit. Get a nice close-up shot here of the west side. This S-Log3, is just great. Really is great. And you can see the dynamic range of the clouds and the sky versus the water and the building structure. It actually has more dynamic range than my eye can see, which is really hard to say for a camera. Most cameras can't even get close. And you know, we get into that crazy talk about dynamic range and how many stops am I getting and what's really going on. Well, it's really hard to say exactly how much dynamic range we're getting. We know that the Sony A7S was rated in the 14.5 area, and then others were saying that it was probably closer to the mid to high 12s. The reality of the situation is the A7S was actually indeed in the low to mid 14, you know, for the dynamic range. It was about 14.5. I've done some tests with it. Others have tested with it. The Sony A7S and S-Log2 can get you real close to 14.5, if not all the way to 14.5. And I tested against my Red, which is 16.5. And although it doesn't have as much dynamic range as the Red, that would not make sense. But it was close. It was still noticeably different than the Red, but it was very close, especially for the money. So with the A7S having 14.5 stops and S-Log2, S-Log3 does give you more latitude. So I'm not going to go here and say, oh, you're going to get 15 stops of dynamic range, because that would be silly of me to do that. But what I will tell you is that this camera does give you more dynamic range than the A7S does, and the A7S was in the 14 range, 14.5. So you do the math yourself and you can kind of see where I'm going with this. You can expect to have more than the A7S with the Mark II, as it does give you S-Log3. So we're walking towards World Trade 1. See if they're distant. Oh look, the water police, NYPD patrolling out there on the water. New York City's so big they have police on the water. This truly is one of the most beautiful boardwalks I've ever been to. If you're ever in the area, Sinatra Park, Hoboken, New Jersey is one of the spots I would definitely visit. It is great. We're out here and it's very dark, the sun is gone, but the A7S Mark II says, I don't care, I'm gonna shoot anyway. This thing is great. It's like we don't even need the sun anymore. It's like this camera just put the sun on retirement, a permanent vacation. The strip over here where there's more people, cars, a little bit more light. ISO, S-Log 3. Just unbelievable how good this looks at 6400 ISO. The battery life seems to be about the same as the A7S or the A7R Mark II. Not much different. Been shooting out here for about 30 to 40 minutes and I still have 54%, so expecting about an hour of constant recording, maybe an hour and 15. People like to come running at Hoboken Park and Sinatra Park, and they like to get their exercise on in the winter at night, if that sounds, you know, just even the least bit abnormal. I don't know. Picture profile off for a couple of shots and see how it fares. 16,000 ISO. You got a crazy moon, Johan just pointed out to me. The moon is just peeking between the Empire State Building and the Chrysler Building. So here we go with the low light test, starting things out at 800 ISO, which is a waste. Really anything below 6400 is a waste, but we're going to do it anyway. The A7S Mark II eats the darkness alive for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and even a snack. Makes everything look so much brighter than it actually is. ISO 3200, you really can't see any noise at all. It's not until about 6400 ISO that you start to see a little bit of noise creeping into the shadows, and by the time we move along to ISO 12800, you see those noise patterns starting to go into the midtones as well, but it's still very clean for this high ISO. Moving along to 25,600, and I can't believe my eyes, I'm sure you can't either. It looks so clean for such high ISO. And there's no camera that can be pushed this high and look this clean. Well, of course, the A7S and the A7R Mark II, but other than that, there is no other camera that can do this. 51,200 is the brink of usability. By the time we move on to 102,400, starting to see a lot of grain, but you could use it in desperate attempts to get a little bit of video here and there. 204,800 is looking really rough. It's just starting to fall apart, but what do you expect when you're shooting this high? Moving along to 409,600, it's starting to look like an old cell phone video, like a bunch of sandpapers, hurting my eyes. Oh my God. The A7S Mark II is a huge leap forward from the original A7. With its bigger body, better grip, internal 4K, 120 frames a second in 1080p, make this camera brilliant. And what makes it even more brilliant is the fact that you can now use S-Log 3 and S-Gamut 3, which is much, much better dynamic range than S-Log 2 and a wider gamut curve. Now, you can also shoot at 1600 ISO in S-Log 2 and S-Log 3, which is down a complete stop from being locked in at 3200 ISO on the original A7S. So this camera is leaps and bounds better. In fact, not only is this camera better and a great upgrade, but this camera is everything that we expected the original A7S to be.
And let's face it, the only cameras on the market today that are going to give you this kind of quality are going to be ones that are 2, 3, 4 times the cost of the A7S Mark II, and maybe even more, and they're still not going to give you the low light capabilities, and they're not going to be as small or run and gun either. The A7S Mark II is not just a jump forward from the original A7S, but an evolution of the best lineup of mirrorless cameras ever released.
So here we are filming the last segment of my video. We're actually filming on the A7S Mark II. It's very dark. There's one street lamp behind my videographer. There's absolutely no lights around us. He's not using a light, and we're at 12,800 ISO. So as you can see, it looks fantastic, and the buildings behind me I know look great. The camera does a great job in low light, as we all knew it would, just with all the additional goodies that the original A7S should have had, like the S-Log3, the internal 4K, and the 120 frames a second in 1080 is an added bonus feature that they've given us, not to mention that you got the 5-axis stabilization and now the 169 autofocus points. Now, another thing I forgot to point out while shooting, it just slipped my mind, and I apologize for that, but one thing I can note for you on this camera is that you can shoot at 1600 ISO instead of the 3200 ISO was the minimum on the A7S. So now when you're shooting an S-Log3, which has got more dynamic range into the shadows and into the highlights than S-Log2 does, you can now shoot at 1600 ISO. So you won't have to use your ND filters as much, which I'm going to go in a review on later and go into more detail on ND filters, because you don't really want to go past 1.2, otherwise you start corrupting the red channel of your video. So you really want to use ND up until about 1.2. If you really need a lot more ND and you're shooting at, say, 3200 ISO, it's not really a good thing to be at 1.5, 1.8, or 2. You start corrupting the red channel like crazy, but that's for another review video. The good thing is you can shoot at 1600 ISO on the A7S Mark II, so that eliminates that problem altogether. So the A7S Mark II also has the 5-axis stabilization added. It's a better body. It doesn't have any cooling issues at all. I never had any cooling issues with the A7R Mark II. Some people did, but I did not. This camera will record up to 30 minutes without shutting off. You'll just have to press record again. It's that typical limited feature that is on all DSLRs and mirrorless cameras, but it's a great camera. It shoots in a black hole. What more would you want to have? You just take it, point it in the dark, crank the ISO, and it does well. The camera is great. But all kidding aside, the camera is fantastic. It's just everything the original A7S should have been. Hopefully you found it really helpful, me walking around here, Hoboken Park and Frank Sinatra Park, and just kind of giving you guys the gist of this camera in the dark. And it is definitely as good, maybe even slightly better than the A7S was. And with all the extra features, it makes this camera a must-have. If you're looking at this one, or you're looking at the A7R Mark II, and you're trying to decide which camera's for you, you have to think about two different things. Do you need the high megapixel count? Because if you need high megapixel photos with accurate, fast focusing, and you need the video, A7R Mark II is for you. If you don't like the fact that it's Super 35 crop, you don't need the megapixels, the A7S Mark II is for you. Great cameras. The A7S is still a great camera, so if you're trying to save a little bit of money, then that camera's for you. But they are all great cameras. They're all fantastic. Sony has upped their game so much with this camera, especially with the uncompressed RAW. That is a great thing to have. The photos I shot were uncompressed RAW, and that is phenomenal. They finally get it. Sony, you finally got it right. Finally. So with all that dynamic range, all that low light, all the goodies they've added, with the on top of the fact that the sensor is already great from the A7S, makes this a steal deal. If you don't have Sony lenses, use the Canon lenses. They're great. They focus faster. They're better. The FE glass is going to focus great on the cameras, but not for manual focus. So if you're doing video, it's pointless to get them. Use Cine lenses or Canon lenses with the Metabones adapter, which I'll put the link down there for you guys. So hopefully you found this review helpful. We've done the best we could here in the dark and in the cold at Hoboken Park. Got another review coming next week. Going to be doing the 5DSR. I've already done the Canon 5DS review. We're doing the 5DSR next Wednesday. So real shortly after this, we're going to have the 5DSR video out. The Ursa Mini is on the way. Chopper is always going through New York City, 24 hours a day practically. They may take a little break here and there between 3 and 4 in the morning, but it just seems like they're never ending. So hopefully found this review helpful, guys. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to purchase any of the gear I review and all the gear I've had in this video. I'll put the links down there in the information box. Don't forget to support the channel. If you plan on purchasing any of the gear, please use the links I provide. Another bit of information for you guys. My big forum site is going to be up sometime in December or January. I'm not sure of an exact date yet. You're going to be able to sign up. It's going to be a full forum boards for you guys to chat, sell your gear, learn about different cameras. I'm going to have sections for every camera brand manufacturer, and I'm also going to have a section where you can ask me questions and share and watch all my videos. It's going to be great. Be a part of the community. Don't forget, facebook.com/groups/happy shooting photo, and you can go right there and check out the group we have there on Facebook and be a part of that community as it grows. And we're going to shift that over to the forum boards real soon. We're going to have the Happy Shooting forums, so stay tuned for that. I'm Corey of Faymus Media. Subscribe, and from Hoboken and Sinatra Park, happy shooting.